Chapter 10, Tested Loyalty. Later that night, when Capone, Chente, and me were finally escorted back to Adsay, I basically knew that I had seen my last day on the main line and definitely wasn't going back this time. I had no interest in going back either. At one time, this was a good yard and there were a lot of solid homeboys out there, but once it flipped and we lost our numbers, everything went sour really fast. I knew that my points were going to get jacked up well above a level 3 by the time I got transferred out too, but I was still hoping that I might end up catching a break and making it to somewhere like either New Folsom or San Quentin. Quentin would have been sweet, but I knew I probably wouldn't get that lucky. I just had to wait and see what happened. Chente and Capone ended up getting celled up together, and I was celled up with my old cellie, Wino. It was good to see Wino again, and we spent the first night catching each other up on what had happened since the chow hall incident. Geronimo and Noodles were both gone. They got 12-month shoot programs and caught a bus to Corcoran. Sleepy and Paco were celled up in the next section over. Chino was celled up with another homeboy by the name of Rudy Jasper Uribe from Soledad, who was the OA, overall authority. Jasper came from the 1 yard, Cascade, for stabbing a Sureño, so he was waiting to go to the SHU and still was waiting to see if the district attorney was going to pick up the case or not. We heard about what happened and he acted alone on the yard. I respected him for that. Joel Lopez was also in the next section over, pending his DA referral and his SHU term. He got rolled up after getting into a personal disagreement with a homeboy of mine from my neighborhood by the name of Joe Curligan. They were cellies in Building 1. Joe had been pushing up on him and threatened to beat Joel up if he returned back to the cell. Joel got spooked and reported this to Sleepy and Chino, who in turn gave him a piece and told him to hit Joe if he posed a threat. Apparently, Joe advanced on Joel as soon as Joel entered the building, and Joel tried to stab him in the sally port. But Joe ended up taking the piece away from Joel, tossed it aside, and then beat the shit out of him. Joe was my homeboy. He wasn't a punk, and he had a reputation in my hood for being a sav. But he was a hothead, and this got him in trouble. I had to stay on him about drawing the line, especially when it came to my fellow NR members, but sometimes Joe had a mind of his own and acted on impulse. For the most part, I kept him in check and tried to keep him around me for that purpose. But I wasn't made aware of this incident until it was already too late. At first, I was upset about this because I could have diffused the whole situation had somebody involved me, but I was at work and it escalated quickly. Unfortunately, after Joe was released from prison about a year later, he would be gunned down in San Francisco and left in the middle of the street for similar reasons. He pushed up on somebody trying to muscle them out of their dope, not knowing they were strapped, carrying a gun. This was the first time I had seen Joel since the incident, but I wasn't holding no ill feelings towards him for what happened. As far as I was concerned, it was personal between him and Joe. Joel was in a cell where I had a clear shot of him, so we were able to somewhat communicate through our windows. When Joel came out for his next shower program, he came to the perimeter of the fence that divided our sections and told me that he needed to get at me and it was urgent. He looked concerned, but I had no idea what it could have been about. Passing kites back and forth from section to section would have been too time consuming, so I was already thinking of another alternative. Joel appeared to be emphatic about getting word to me as soon as possible, so I devised a window code that enabled us to communicate fluidly. The doors in Adsay were solid steel with a rectangular window in the center that provided visibility. The code I devised was a simple window code. I divided the alphabet into 3 pairs, A through J, K through T, and U through Z. Each letter had a specific number of wipes over the window. The first 1 through 10 would start from the top and end in the middle. The second 1 through 10 would start from the middle and end at the bottom. And the last 1 through 6 would be full wipes using the full length of the entire window. I gave Joel the first example to ensure he got it. Then he commenced to relay the message that he said was so urgent. After he was finished giving me all the letters, I sat down to separate all the words and couldn't believe what I was reading. Jasper greenlighted you for giving up the yard. He said you should have stayed out there and established the yard. According to Joel, Jasper put a green light on me because it was his opinion that I should have stayed out on the yard to do whatever was necessary in order to reestablish the yard. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I was a target out there and everybody knew it. It was also a fundamental responsibility of mine to protect Chente, who was also a target. There was no way of avoiding this. There was no way me and Chente could have stayed out there on that yard because the Sureños would have undoubtedly tried to hit us. What was I supposed to do? Go back out there and walk around like a sitting duck? I told Joel to relay it back to me again just so I could be sure I wasn't getting the wrong message. When he confirmed it a second time, I told him I'd get back to him. I sat down with Wino and asked him what he thought about it. Wino was just as shocked, but it didn't surprise me because he wasn't an NR member and he wouldn't have been privy to that type of information. But Joel was. I still had 10 days to figure out how I was going to handle this because that's the soonest I would have been cleared for the yard. During those next 10 days, I interrogated Joel and asked him as many questions as I could think of that would help me draw a logical conclusion in the end. Did you actually hear this from Jasper yourself? What else was said? Were they supposed to hit me on the next yard? What did the other brothers say? Etc, etc, etc. According to Joel, they were supposed to hit me on the following yard and the other brothers didn't say much about it. This was ridiculous. I hadn't done anything wrong to merit being green-lighted. I fulfilled all my responsibilities and had honored my commitment in every aspect expected of me, but yet these brothers were jockeying a means to have me hit. Now I needed to decide how I would handle this and what my best course of action was. My options were simple. Either I go out there and wait to see what happens, or I go out there and get off first. I wasn't going to allow myself to be victimized, so the choice was easy. I was going to go out there and draw first blood. And if Jasper and Chino were going to try to hit me over something as intempestive as this, then they would become my targets. Plain and simple. Fuck it. I wasn't going to let anybody get the drop on me. The only questions I didn't ask Joel was why he was telling me all this and why he was putting his neck on the line on the count of me. I didn't even think about asking him, as I considered it a blessing to even be given a heads up about something like this. But this compelling question would gracefully be answered in due time and the reasoning would be startling. Over the next couple of days, whenever our section would come out for shower program, I made it a point to make eye contact with Jasper and Chino to see if I could pick up on any vibes or sense anything inauspicious through their temperaments. I didn't know Jasper, so I really couldn't gauge him, and I wasn't picking up anything from Chino, but still, I couldn't take a chance and I wasn't about to either. I told Wino that as soon as we got out to the yard and they opened the gate, I was making a beeline for Jasper and Chino and was gonna bomb on both of them. Wino was my boy and he offered to get my back, but I told him not to involve himself and it wasn't worth him falling into bad standings. Joel, on the other hand, told me he'd be right there with me and that he would handle it however I saw fit. This situation stressed me out. I couldn't understand how these brothers could just turn on me like this, and no matter what happened, I would be the one in trouble when it was all said and done. On the morning we were scheduled to go out to the yard, I felt sick. I was nervous, I felt agitated, but I also felt a strong sense of temerity for being turned on like this. When the officers came to our door to cuff us up for yard, I let Wino get cuffed first. I trusted him and I didn't think he'd flip the script on me, but in this game, it's just best that you don't take any chances or put yourself in vulnerable situations. After all, I was getting ready to go out there and hit the OA and his second. Technically, this put Wino in a precarious position because he knew what I was about to do. When we finally got to the door leading outside to the yard, my heart started pounding faster. I was trying to get myself pumped up for what I was getting ready to do. Bear in mind that there's a gunner above the yard within 30 feet, and they shoot as soon as anyone starts to fight. They're supposed to fire a 35mm block gun twice, and if that doesn't work, they fire a Mini 14. Sometimes you get a trigger-happy gunner that will fire the Mini 14 on the first shot. That's what I was worried about. When we finally got outside, the first thing that hit me was the humidity and the heat. There was no air moving and it just felt hot. There were 2 yards. The Sureños were on the yard to my left and the homeboys were on the yard to my right. In those days, before we actually got on the yard, we were placed in a small fenced-in enclosure where we were uncuffed and stripped out. Then they unlocked another gate using a pull bar and we were finally released out to the yard. While Wino was being uncuffed, I looked up to see the gunner and where he was positioned, and then I scanned the yard to see where Jasper and Chino were. I love my people, and now I was being forced to turn against them. I felt dizzy. I started spinning. My equilibrium was out of whack. Not because I was getting ready to fight, but because I felt like I was headed for an irredeemable cessation. That same empty, discomposed feeling when one hears about somebody dying, trying to disconnect and disengage from something that means everything to you. My heart was in this, but now it was all about to come to an improprietous end. Me and Wino were the last ones to be let out, and everyone was already out there. Joel was waiting directly across the yard, and I gave him a quick nod to let him know that everything was still in motion, that I was about to do this. Jasper and Chino were at the far end of the yard. I didn't detect anything that looked suspect or out of order. I didn't see any tension either. This bothered me and briefly caused me to second guess myself, but I was already committed and there was no turning back now. When the bar was pulled and the gate opened, I headed straight for Jasper and Chino, but Joel cut me off and said, "Wait." He physically put his arm around me and said, "Hold on, bro, let's wait." But I didn't want to wait and I almost walked around him. He said, "Just wait, boxer. I think I might have been jumping the gun." Now I was upset. I asked, "What do you mean jumping the gun?" Joel told me that when he first got out to the yard, he overheard Jasper tell Sleepy, "Don't worry about all that. It's all good." That one issue got cleared up. Joel said he believed that they were talking about me. I was still leery, but reluctantly waited. As I made my way around the yard, everyone seemed to be in good spirits and they welcomed me back. There were handshakes, hugs, and everything seemed to be in order. But I was thinking that maybe this was still a front and that they were just trying to get me comfortable, to get me to drop my guard. Finally, I made my way over to Jasper and Chino. We shook hands and I told Jasper, "What's going on, bro?" He replied, "With what?" I said, "I don't know. I'm picking up some bad vibes and I feel like something's in the climate." I really wasn't. I was just fishing because of what Joel told me, but at the same time, I didn't want to break Joel's confidence or put him in an awkward position. I just played like I was picking up the vibes. He said, "You're tripping, bro. Everything's good." I let it be at that and nothing happened that day, but something still wasn't right. We spent the rest of the yard talking about the chow hall incident and all the other things that were happening on the 3-yard. When Wino and I got back to the cell, I told him what happened and he told me the same thing, that something wasn't right. But I didn't know what else I could do. I decided to just wait it out. When we were released for the following yard, everybody came out to the yard except Joel. Come to find out, this fucking weasel was on his way out and he was trying to take me with him. And he almost did. Jasper and Chino told me that he had been acting funny the last couple of weeks and that him locking it up didn't surprise them. Apparently, Jasper disciplined Joel for sleeping, disrespecting the tier officer, and going to the yard drunk. But Joel wasn't doing the discipline. I told Jasper and Chino what Joel had told me and everything that happened, and they just laughed. They said this was something he completely contrived himself and nothing like that was ever discussed. My career almost ended that day, not because of my own misgivings, but because I had almost allowed myself to be deceived in a most undesirous way. This was a learning experience, but it was also a shrewd test of my loyalty. In reality, I almost failed and I would have if Joel hadn't intervened, but I guess it just wasn't meant to happen like that. I believe Joel really tried to take me out with him, but when it really came down to going out there and getting off, he pissed all over himself. When he realized that I was serious and was about to follow through with hitting Chino and Jasper, he temerariously backed out. In retrospect, I wouldn't be writing this book if Joel didn't stop me that day, because I would have been in the hat in bad standings at the age of 21. Over the next 20 years, I would be subjected to these same kinds of tests, time and time again. This was probably the only blotch on my resume, the only black spot on my record. Almost being deceived by someone else into taking off on a fellow loved one and not following my gut instincts. I guess I learned early on that loyalty in this game can either be a capricious test of one's own will or a benighted game breaker that can take you out.